Assalamu alaikum students. Welcome to another lecture, another important lecture on TOEFL. Yes, you remember that? What did we talk about in the last lecture? I'm sure you all have revised that lecture. Yes? Good. So my dear students, this course, particularly the course we are pursuing in this semester, and you all know that this is second part of our course that we started in the last semester, teaching of English as a foreign language, right? And this is the second phase of that important course, because this course, I would say, more practical than other courses, right? Because this is the course that helps you how to teach English as a foreign language. We know that English is a foreign language for us because it is not a language of communication. However, I told you in the last semester that when you teach English in an environment where it is language of communication, so then we call it TESOL, teaching of English as a second language, right? I gave you lots of examples, and I'm sure you know the difference between TOEFL, that teaching of English as a foreign language, and TESOL, teaching of English as a second language. So this is what we talked in a lecture in our last semester. Today, in fact, we are going to start another two lectures, this lecture and the coming lecture, on teaching speaking skills. It's very important that you see, you must have seen the mushrooms of institutions, you must have seen a large number of centers, the language centers, and you must have read this this billboard that's spoken English, right? So therefore, since you are pursuing this degree, and of course you would be looking for opportunities in the private sector as well, where you can be hired as a spoken English teacher. So that's why, of course, we are going to discuss how to teach particularly speaking skills, right? Because you know that when you teach language, we focus on 4 skills, right? Which 4 skills? The input and the output skills, reading skill and listening skill, writing skill, fine, of course, the speaking skills. And you know it very well that reading is, of course, an input skill, and you know it that listening is also an input skill. And then once you speak, of course, it is the output skill, and once you write, again, it's an output skill. So when you teach language, we teach all these 4 skills. So while teaching writing skills, what do? You also teach what? Writing. You also help students in improving their grammar, right? And what do we call it? We call it error analysis. So this is what, in fact, in language centers, of course, teacher teach, and in good institutions you must have heard, you must have seen, or you might have done a language course from somewhere where there are 4 different classes, right? And in every class, in every hour, the teachers in fact help the learners improving one of the skills. For example, maybe the first class, of course, would be your writing skills, right? Why some institutions give writing skills in the beginning, in the very first class? Because they feel that students are fresh, so the writing skill can be done well in the first slot, followed by, in fact, a listening skill, and then, of course, a reading skill, and maybe finally a speaking skill. Generally, in fact, the speaking skills, of course, period, that the slot is allocated maybe towards the close of the day, because people say that, of course, the first 3 slots, they were comparatively tough for the students, and in the 4th slot, when it is speaking only, students find it easy to interact, to speak, of course. So it helps both the learners and the teacher, in fact. So our 2 lectures, this lecture and the coming lecture, of course, will be focusing on how to teach speaking skills. So as usual, what we have to do, first we will be talking about the last lecture. So in the last lecture, we talk about integration of skills, right? And you know, my dear student, that of course when you teach a skill, you cannot put other skills all together in your back burners, right? So when you teach writing skills, definitely reading is there. When you teach writing skills, fine, what else? Speaking skill is also there, in fact. So all 4 skills, right? They are somehow, in one way or the other, an instructor in fact focuses on other skills as well. So we call it what? Integration of skills, right? You teach speaking, and of course when you teach speaking, definitely students are listening to you, right? And while listening, sometimes they take notes. So there is writing, there is listening, fine. And then whenever they have to ask a question, they ask questions. So again, what? There is an integration of skills. 4 skills are what? Integrated. So integration of skills is also there, in fact. So what we talked about, that why do we need integration, and how do we teach what? Integration of skills. So we saw what are the skills. That of course mean that thing that you do regularly, right? And then language skills we talk about. We see we had a discussion on it, that input skills and the output skills. We also call them essential skills of language teaching, right? Essential skills of language learning. When you learn a language, so how do you learn a language? So what do? You listen to that language, somebody is speaking that language, and you being learner, you listen to a newscaster, you listen to your teacher, you listen to a documentary, you listen to your interviewer, you listen to your boss. So of course when you live in an environment where people speak that language, so you listen to that language continuously. So by listening on a regular basis, you see there is input. So that input of course helps you in learning. So that is what we call it. The input skills is what? Listening. And once you listen, another output of that listening is, we call it speaking skills, right? Listening is the input, and of course speaking is, that is the output, fine. And then of course other skills are reading and writing. They are also called as literary skills, because you have to learn reading, you have to learn writing, in fact. Whereas the listening and speaking is concerned, of course, maybe unconsciously sometime you listen and you learn. You must have seen many people, in fact, right? So they live in an environment, so they can speak that language, fine, and also they can listen to that language, but when you ask them to write, they cannot write. In fact, Urdu, for example, talk about Urdu, there are so many people, in fact, they can speak Urdu, they can listen to Urdu, they can understand Urdu, but if you ask them to write Urdu, they cannot write Urdu. So it means that they have never learned writing of Urdu, and even they cannot read Urdu, because they have never learned reading of Urdu. So this is what the situation is, that there are some people who listen and speak, but they are unable to write, right? So that's why the literary skills, in fact, need your efforts. You have to put efforts to learn your reading skills and also writing skills. And then of course when you talk about these skills, there are some sub skills are also involved. For example, speaking skills, sub skill can be your pronunciation, right? You learn how to pronounce, in fact. And sub skills also mean definitely your articulation, right? How you articulate words, your confidence. When you talk about writing skills, the sub skills can be your grammar skills, in fact, right? So the essential skills and their sub skill, the skills that come under, for example, under listening skill, that can be, of course, there are sub skills, that active listening, passive listening, in fact, listening for information, right? Listening for articulation, listening for entertainment. And when you talk about reading skills, there are some sub skills of reading. For example, skimming, in fact, you skim, you scan. So all these are what we call them sub skills of the essential skills. And then what does integrating skills mean? In fact, mean that when you, of course, when all skills, all the 4 skills work together, integrate with one another, right? That one skills leads to another, and of course that skill lead to another. So when skills, of course, and even you could say that the skills and the sub skills, they function together, what do we call them? We call them integration of skills. And how can we integrate language skills in the classroom? So again, this is very important, that you see, first of all we have to decide, do we need to integrate? And we have discussed, yes, integration of skills is important. Because why integration of skills is important? Because once you integrate skills, so you are helping students in all the 4 skills. Well, students, so this is the point we're talking about, that how can we integrate language skills in the class, right? So what we do, my dear student, that when we speak, right, so you being teacher, you speak in the class, you talk about various issues, you talk about sports, you talk about a budget, you talk about inflation, you talk about a price hike, you talk about strikes, you talk about various issues. So what happens? You speak, right? You being teacher, what you do, you speak, and your learners, of course, they listen, right? So you talk and they listen, right? So again, see, speaking and then listening, right? And of course, sometimes when you speak in the class, so what happens? The learners, they listen and they also take notes. They write down things, right? So then, see, there is writing skills, fine. See, speaking, listening, and writing. And again, they respond sometimes. Again, this two interaction, fine. So it means that there is an integration of skills. The teacher speaks, and sometimes the teacher writes whatever he speaks, so that people would know. Right? So, I mean, speaking of a teacher and writing of a teacher. On one hand, see, it means the teacher is also, in fact, integrating. And definitely, you would, raise the question that, well, teacher is thinking also. So yes, thinking process never stops. It goes on, you see, because once you write something on the board, so you keep on thinking. The thinking process goes on. You think and you write. And also once you finish writing, what you do? You talk, right? You speak, in fact. You try to explain. Being teacher, you explain things. You give explanation. And then now the ball goes to the learners. So what learner do, in fact, you see, what they do? They listen to you, right? So once they listen, and then at times they respond. They reply. They give you feedback, or they ask questions. You see, at times some learners don't ask questions, but they write down, right? So first thing, they want to retain that information, they want to keep that information with them. So what the students do, they write down, they take note of the things that you have talked about or you have written on the board, fine, and then they ask questions as well. So see, there is an integration of skills. So this is very important. Being a language teacher, we integrate skills. Let's start now our today's lecture, teaching speaking skills. Very important, in fact, right? How to teach speaking, fine? How to make your learner comfortable in speaking. And my dear students, this is very important, because this is a skill that we need more, right? Of course, writing, we cannot say that writing is not important, but writing is required whenever there's an urgency. But here you move around, you are in an environment where you have to talk with the banker, you have to talk with the shopkeeper, you have to talk with the driver, to talk with of course the computer operator. So you have to talk, you have to speak, right? So therefore, being teacher of this language, you see, you need to help your students how to improve their speaking. So being a student of this course, we must know how to teach this skill, which is very important. So we'll be talking about these things, that what are the characteristics of spoken language, and then we'll talk about principles for designing speaking activities. Because how do you teach? We talked about that, well, we teach, a good teacher in fact teaches through activities, right? So activities should be well planned, should be well thought out, should be well executed, right? And only then the learner would learn and they would improve their speaking skills. Fine. And again we'll talk about how we can use group work in speaking activities. Fine. And then we'll talk about common types of speaking activities. Right? So types of activities, group work, effective use of group work, and principles, and of course characteristics of spoken English. Alright, so dear students, the first thing is that what are the characteristics of spoken language, right? So here, my dear students, speaking is a skill, right? I mean, it's a skill, and you know what is a skill? That of course the skill needs your practice. Fine, it is of course a process, it is a phenomenon that you do repeatedly. Fine, and then of course once you do it continuously, what happens? You become more skilled, right? You must have seen what a person, and of course in computer, initially he is a slow typist, but once he practices more, then he types without seeing the keyboard. He knows in fact that where is what A, where is S, where is D. So his fingers move around and of course he types. Similarly, like I gave you example of driving many times. Well, when initially you find it hard. So initially you are learning phase, right? But once you drive, right? So that driving skill you improve, and then you drive. In fact, you see, of course, I mean, you care for your ring mirrors, you see your back mirrors, and you see, you look ahead and you drive, right? So that is what. So is the case here, mean that speaking is a skill, just like swimming, driving a car, or playing ping pong, right? So if you play cricket, you become a good cricketer. If you play volleyball, you become a good player of volleyball. Similarly, the football, right, ping pong, driving, whatever, right? Skill that of course you initially you may be slow in that, fine, but once you do it, you become more skilled. Right? So is the case here that speaking is a skill. So you know the skill needs practice, and practice makes a person better. Right? So that's why, of course, when you see that talking about characteristics of the spoken language, so first is that its characteristic is that it is what? It's a, you see, it's a skill. Second, in fact, too often in the traditional classroom, the learning of English has been relegated to linguistic knowledge only. For example, knowledge of vocabulary and grammar rules, with little or no attention paid to practicing language skills. Right? This is important. I mean, the point is, in simple words, I would say that, you see, traditionally, right, where people in fact used to learn language, so they would focus on vocabulary only. They would focus on grammar only. So, I mean, if you focus on the grammar part more or the vocabulary part more, so then you may not speak language well, right? I might have told you that of course there are some students, they have learned dictionaries by heart. They know each and every word, but when it comes to speaking that language, they cannot speak, right? So it means that their vocabulary, the words they have crammed, they have learned by heart, right, may not help them. Right? So this is a traditional way that where of course the teacher used to focus more on what? Vocabulary and grammar. Whereas of course when talking about teaching speaking skills, my dear students, you see, so what happened that we give practice to the students, we create opportunities for the students so that they would speak that language more, because this is a skill which is more applied. Right? So focus would be on applied language, applied linguistics, as compared to that is of course mean the performance, that the knowledge of that language. So traditionally in fact focus was on what? Linguistic knowledge, that knowing about the language in fact. But of course the use of language is a must. Right? You should be able to speak that language. This is more important than knowing about the language, because once you specialize, yes, you need to know about the language. There's no harm in it. But when you join a course for improving your skills, so in this case, my dear students, see, you being teacher, what you do, you focus on what the use of those skills, which is in demand, which is of course a need as well. So how can we tell the difference between knowledge and skill? That is the question, in fact, right? So according to Bygate 1987, fundamental difference is that both can be understood and memorized, but only a skill can be imitated and practiced. See, this is important, right? So our question is, what is the question? The difference between knowledge and skill. And we refer to the Bygate, a researcher, right? So he says the fundamental difference is that both can be understood. I mean what? Knowledge can be understood, right? And of course, knowledge can be memorized. Skill can be, of course, right? Talking about listening skill, talking about reading skills, fine. But only a skill can be imitated, right? So skill can be used and practiced, fine. The point is, of course, speaking is a skill, right? Now the point is that, well, you can speak, so you can practice it, fine. If it's a grammatical skills, yes, of course, I mean the skill that, see, of course you have had it and you can use it, in fact. That can be imitated, that can be the practice. So this is the difference, in fact, the fundamental difference between what? Knowledge and skill, that both can be understood, both can be memorized, but skill can be imitated, skill can be practiced, right? So if you talk about the language skills, because we are learning how to teach language, so you see that these skills, talking about reading skills or the writing skills, some listening skills, so you see, skill can be practiced, right? Skill can be imitated. You can, I mean, when somebody speaks, I can imitate his speaking, in fact. Clear? But if somebody is, of course, I'm a very a well-read person, he has knowledge, right? So of course it is that he has gained, fine. So the point is that the knowledge is there, you can understand, you can memorize, but of course the skill is that you can practice, you can in fact imitate, fine. You can give lots of examples, in fact, right? So skill is one that can be imitated, that can be practiced, in fact. So we're talking about, characteristics of spoken language. So there is spontaneity, right? And there is time constraint. What is spontaneity, by the way? Spontaneous, right? So in spoken English, what is it? There is spontaneity, right? Spontaneous answers, right? Because when you talk, you don't have anything that you have absorbed or you have stored somewhere that you would reply. Right? So right now I'm talking to you. You are listening to me, in fact. Right? So, I, of course, talk to you. Seeing your body language, I talk about it. Maybe in the next class, I would talk about different thing. You see, maybe after a while, I'll be talking about another element of that. So, in speaking, this is another characteristics of spoken language, that there is spontaneity, right? There is, of course, a change, and spontaneous as well. Right? So this is what mean other characteristics of what we call it spoken English, right? Or speaking skill particularly, and there is time constraint as well. Because when you speak, right? So you speak for a particular time. You don't, if you speak on and on and on, so it is just one way talking. So you speak for some time and then you shift the ball, in fact, right? So now you give chance to your listener that he would say something. You speak, right? So you have a time for your speaking, and then you take a pause and let your listener respond, right? So the listener starts speaking, and then of course again there is a shift in paradigm. You become listener then. Earlier you were speaker, right? You speak for some time, right? And then what happens? You transfer. Of course, the charge is transferred. You were the speaker, and of course your friend was the listener. Now once you stop speaking, student, friend, what he does, he starts speaking and you become listener now. So your position changes in fact. So there is of course time constraint is there, and there is what? Spontaneity. Now here what is spontaneity? You see that in most situations people do not plan ahead of time what they are going to say. I told you earlier that we don't plan. Of course, that what would I say? So speaking is more spontaneous. You see the situation and then you respond. At times you become aggressive. At times you become very polite, very courteous, right? So and we don't plan that I'm going to see the person, I'll be very aggressive. At times you have to change. And you never plan what would you say. And of course sometimes you plan and your plans fail. You cannot achieve. Right? So dear students, this is what spontaneity. The fact that speech is spontaneous means that it is full of false starts, repetitions, incomplete sentences and short phrases. There is spontaneity. There are fillers. Right? So this is what means that in your speech is spontaneous. Means full of false starts. Right? So you never plan your speech. So there can be some false starts. There can be repetition. Like of course when you listen to this lecture you might have seen there are repetitions as well. Right? Or at times there is only an utterance, not a complete sentence is given. Fine? Or short phrases. Spontaneity. Should we expect the students to produce complete sentences in language class? This is again important. Yes. Right? When you talk about the speaking skills, yes, because it is the characteristics of speaking that there is spontaneity. So we cannot expect that the students would be speaking complete sentences because it's a spoken language. Right? So it's an utterance, of course, it works because in speaking, yes, we give utterances and of course the meaning is got. Right? So this is what the point is, that we cannot expect from our students that they should give complete sentences. Right? Sometimes of course the question is raised, and then of course if the teacher intention is to teach students how to reply, so they ask for the complete sentences. However, in spoken English, the teaching speaking skills, spontaneity is observed. Time constraint, what is it? Student must be able to produce unplanned utterances in real time. Yes, this is important. I told you that you have to speak for some time. So there is a time constraint. In real time means that now it's my turn. That I am talking, of course, I have to finish this talk, fine. And then what you do, my dear students, yes, you reply, you respond, fine. Otherwise, people will not have the, of course, patience to listen to them, in fact. Right? So, when you speak for some time. There is a time constraint. You have to express yourself in real time. And then you see the response. You see? Response. Fine. So, activities do you think would help to prepare students for real-time speech in English? Right? So, of course, you have to think of some activities. Right? Which you think student would, yes, help students to prepare for the real speech in English. Yes, that student would be ready for any kind of question. Because you are talking, in fact. You can expect what? Aggression. You can expect what? In fact, courtesy. You can expect no. You can expect yes, in fact. And of course, expecting the answers, then you. If somebody behaves well, so you would not be aggressive. Naturally, if you talk, in fact, with somebody and you feel that, well, you are talking, you are expressing yourself and the person is very, very courteous, very polite, he is responding you, so fine. And sometimes if the person, in fact, loses the temper, so what we see that if one person loses temper, the second does the same. The other person does the same. So this is what the situation is, that when we teach speaking skills our students, so we tell them that, of course, that situation, that it depends on the situation, that when to be angry, when to be polite, and when to be courteous and all that, in fact. Cool. So types of speaking tasks. So what are the types of speaking tasks? In fact, it is very important, in fact, for us being teachers to provide the students with a variety of speaking activities. Because teaching speaking skills through activities help the learners more. This has proved through research, in fact, that activity-based teaching, in fact, does a lot. Activity-based teaching helps the teacher. Activity-based teaching helps the learner. And activity-based teaching helps, in fact, teaching learning process. So that's why, of course, all the experts, they believe that activities should be designed and activities should be customized, activities should be well planned, well thought over. While planning activities, the teacher keeps the students in mind, the teacher keeps the students' background in mind, and then he plans his activities, and these activities can be executed well in the class. So why we focus on activities? A variety of speaking activities will enable students to cope with different situations in reality. Speaking, of course, that yes, we cannot decide that, of course, speaking would be for this situation. We need to speak in different situations. So once we design activities, so we keep that context in mind. We keep that situation in mind. So keeping different situations in mind would definitely help us, in fact, of course, in teaching speaking skills. Variety helps, in fact, keep motivation high. So when you design activities, so there should be variety in the activities, right? Why variety? Because if in one class, if your activity is based on interaction at the airport, the next time you can have activity in a bank. The next time you can have an activity with a travel agent. The next time you can have an activity, for example, with a shopkeeper. The next time you can have an activity with an insurance agent. So next time you can have an activity with the bus driver. So next time you can have an activity with an embassy official. So see, different situations, right? These activities, there is variety in these activities, so this variety keeps morale of these students high. So that's why when you design activities, you need to be innovative, you need to be creative, so that students would not lose interest and they would be paying attention, right? Variety may suit students of different learning styles. Is that clear? Because of course when you have variety in your activities, so because learners have different learning styles. Some learners, in fact, they show their more interest in the field learning, in fact, right? So if their activities are from the field, so they would learn more. And some learners, in fact, they find it easy to learn in an academic environment. So if this activity is based on in an educational institution, so that would definitely help more. So therefore, my dear students, we being teachers, we being student of this course, we believe that when you have to teach speaking skills, you have to make some activities, and these activities should be innovative, these activities should be customized, and these activities should be well planned, so that learner would learn, and they would in fact use these activities for the achievement of their goals, right? All right. So there are two major purposes for listening, in fact. You see, one is to get information, and the other is for social reason. Is that clear? First one is listening, and second is what? Social reason. Since speaking is what? Reciprocal of listening, the same is true of speaking, right? I told you initially, of course, that speaking and listening, these are oral skills. So that's why the previous point as well, that of course the purpose for listening, right? First purpose is to get information. When you listen, why do you listen? You need information. Why do you listen? You have to get information, right? And the other is for social reasons, right? Society. You have to live in the society. So unless you listen and you reply, you cannot be part of that society. So we listen for information, we listen for social reasons, in fact. Well, students, so two purposes of listening I gave you: information and social reason. Now speaking, because our focus is on speaking skills. Speaking is what reciprocal of listening, right? Because you see, listen and speak, right? The same is true of speaking. Why do we speak? To give information. Listening to get information, right? Speaking to give information. And then of course the other one is social reasons. Again, you speak for the social reasons. Is that clear? You speak to live in a society, speaking with the society. Again, listening with the society. So of course the environment where you live, you have to speak with people, you have to interact with people. So this means speaking and listening, of course, they are reciprocals. According to Littlewood, in fact, communicative speaking activities can be divided into two types. We're talking about types of speaking activities, dear students. So there's a researcher, Littlewood, says that communicative speaking activities, now you know what is communicative speaking activities, activities which help your students to communicate, right? So they can be divided into two types. One, functional communicative activities, and social interaction activities, right? I mean, earlier we discussed that listening to get information, speaking to give information, and second is social reasons. So here mean these speaking activities, communicative speaking activities, can be divided into two types. First one, functional communication activities, that is, function. You have to function, you have to perform some functions. Now, those activities will help you perform some activities. You have to give directions, you have to request, you have to negate, you have to question, and then of course social interaction, right? You have to interact with people, you have to sympathize with people, you have to console with people, you have to condole with people, you have to help people, in fact, you have to seek help, you have to give help. So of course there is social interaction. So here there is, of course, the model is there by Littlewood, pre-CA, in fact. What? See, I told you that of course means pre, right? Before structural activities, and then quasi.com activities, right? And then com.act, functional com.act, and social interaction. Fine. Role playing is what? Problem solving is social interaction. Fine. Obtaining information, functional.com, right? That is obtaining information. And then of course mean pre-CA, right? Structural activities, and then quasi mean half, in fact. And then send patterns, drills, dialogues. Fine. And then once you have functional com, and then you have what? Social interaction act. Is that clear? And then of course mean in com.act we have what? Information gap, choices, and feedback. So this is what mean. In other words, that this Littlewood's model can be given in this way as well, that you have some structural activities. What? Structured things are there, and then you have quasi.com, right? Not full, quasi mean half. And then coming to the other one, that is com mean communication, in fact, that is functional, and then you have social interaction. So for beginning, in fact, students, you can call them beginners, pre-communicative activities are also necessary. See, like if you see here, pre-communicative activities, C for communicative, A for activities, right? So if I show you here, for beginning students or for the beginners, pre-communicative activities are also necessary, which are more structural and allow the learners to practice the form of language. It's a beginning stage, so structures are important. So if I go back here, see the pre-communicative activities, structures are given. Fine. So because they are the beginners, they are learning it for the first time, they have never been exposed to this language, they don't know the ABC of the language, so they need some basic structures, right? For particularly beginners, in fact. See, which are more structured and allow the learners to practice the forms of the language, right? However, we should make speaking task as communicative as possible. Again, if you see that, no matter we are dealing with beginners, no matter we are helping them in the basic structures part, right? We need to make these activities as communicative as possible. Mind you, we are dealing with pre-communicative activities, we are dealing with beginners, right? And you know that beginners, of course, are doing it for the first time. They don't know the basics. They need to be given basics, but again, the focus should be on communication. Now, see, so, I mean, if you go back for a while here, mean that here, when you are teaching at the adult level, of course, a higher level, then more on functional activities, more on social interaction, right? So, CELTA mean teaching of English, in fact certificate in English to adults. So over there your activity should be more on interaction, obtaining information, giving information, or social interaction mean role playing and all that. Okay, so dear students, some types of speaking activities, very simple. Information gap activities, right? You have heard in the last lecture, you have, I mean, of course, we had a discussion on it, that information gap activities, that one entity has information and the other seeks information, right? So, information gap activities, that one student has information about, that supposing he has visited a place, so he knows much about Karachi, and the second person who is going to Karachi, of course, so now there is what? Information gap. One student has done, I mean, photosynthesis, he knows what is photosynthesis, and second who is a beginner, he needs to know. One student who has been to Toronto, so he has of course visited Toronto, different cities, different, I mean, systems, educational system, the health system, so he can guide you, he has information. So information gap activities can be one of the types of what speaking activities. Dialogue and role play, yes, of course, we talked about that dialogues can be there between a teacher and a student, between father and a son, between daughter and a mother, right, between two friends, between, in fact, you could say a shopkeeper and a customer, between a driver and a conductor, between driver and conductor and I mean the passenger. So role plays are there, right? Or you see dialogues, I mean of course mean two, when the person A and the person B, they talk about an issue, they could talk about corruption, they talk about pollution, they talk about health issues, they talk about cleanliness, they talk about systems, so they can be dialogue, right? So one person asks question and second replies, so a dialogue. Or the role plays where roles are assigned. So dear students, what that dialogues could be there, very important speaking activity, role play of course, and then activities using pictures. Picture description is a very good activity, my dear students. When you teach speaking skills, picture can be used, and I will be using some pictures of course after a while. Problem solving activities, a situation is given, right? Students in fact see that situation and they try to solve the problem, and other so many other activities are there. So here for example, look at here, information gap activities, this picture, and now you are in a position to see this picture and you can manage it well. See, there's activity A, of course, look at here, what is this in English, for example? What is this in English? It's a bike, right? What's that in English, right? It's a bus. Is that a car? No, it isn't. It's a jeep. Look, that's a car. Yes, it's a Chinese car. Fine. Look, is that an English car? No, it isn't. Fine. What? It's a Japanese car. That's an English car. So again, look at here, information gap activities, right? So the one person has information, he knows about the cars, he knows about in fact the objects, and then the question is asked and in fact there is a reply. So we call it information gap activities, and you can design so many activities. I told you in the last semester, newspaper can be used, right? If you are in a place where you don't have access to technology, I mean these days IT, of course, the internet has done a lot. You can download some activities out there, but if you don't have access to internet, what you can do? You can use newspaper, right? If you don't have, I mean, English newspaper available, then Urdu newspaper, we can translate them, right? Pictures can be taken, and you can write dialogues on your own. And the best thing is that if you create your own in information gap activities. This is an activity B. Use the same picture but cut them up and paste them on cards, and give each student a different picture, right? These of course from the same information gap activities. You can have another activity. This time we can do this then, right? So we can use the same picture, cut them up, paste them on cards, and give each student a different picture. This time, what is this in English? It's a bike. What is this in English? It's a bus, right? Is that a car? No, it isn't. See, the pictures have been cut. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 pictures. You can see on your screen that there are 4 pictures. 1 about bike, 2nd about bus, 3rd about a car, 4th again about, of course, that, 3rd about a jeep, and the 4th about a car. So you can give directions, ask your partner, what is it, right? What is in his or her picture? Example, what is in your picture? There is a car, there is a bus, there is a bike, right? What's in your picture? There is a jeep. Clear? Very simple. For the beginners, these activities of course are useful and they can easily do that. However, if you have to use this for the adults, then you can change them accordingly, right? Situation of course is important. Obviously, the second activity includes an information gap that first one doesn't, right? Information gap activities can be designed at a very elementary level so that communicative practices can be done for almost the very beginning of a foreign language learning. So initially, of course, if you are the beginner, if you are helping the beginners, so these activities can be done because they can be more useful in fact. So dear students, in fact, what we talked about in this lecture, in fact, coming towards what we call it summary of this lecture, it was our first lecture on what? Speaking skills. So what we talked about in this lecture, mind you that we will be continuing this lecture. We have one more lecture on speaking skills, in a very important area in fact, because you might find so many jobs as far as in fact your good speaking English skills are concerned, and mind you that you need to be good at these skills, right? And why, again, for the job point of view, I tell you that wherever you go for an interview, then this skills speaks volume for you. That how you respond to an interviewer, how you answer to the questions of the interviewer, and because sometimes your credentials, your documents, they are there, but the way you respond, the way you handle that, of course, the question answer sessions, those things matter a lot. Is that clear? So therefore you need to be good at speaking skills. And how can you improve your speaking skills? Of course, it's a skill. So skill need what? Practice. And the more you practice, of course, the better you would be in fact. So in this lecture, my dear students, in this lecture number 21, we talked about what is speaking skill in fact. And we saw that speaking is one of the essential skills and very important skill. Why it is important? Because this is the skill that if you compare it with other skills, right? We practice speaking more than other skills, right? I mean, wherever you are speaking, in fact, right? You are at an airport, you are of course in a bus, you are in a subway, right? So wherever you are in a cab, you are in of course the bus, you are in a hostel, the university, home, wherever you are, speaking goes on. Speaking never stops, in fact. So that's why your good, spoken English, of course, is very, very important, right? And here I would say that, well, to live in a society, you need to be good at speaking and listening skills. Writing and reading, of course, they are literary skills. Fine. That, of course, if you pursue your career, fine, of course, in education or in a job, professional jobs, so you need to have those skills as well. But as far as speaking is concerned, of course, wherever you go, if you are good at speaking skills, you can do well, right? So that's why the speaking and listening skills are important, and we call them the oral skills as well, because unconsciously what we do, that we speak and we listen. So characteristics of what spoken language, we talk about that what there is spontaneity in what you see in speaking, right? And we also talk that there you see what happens in speaking, that you see you have time constraint, right? Spontaneity means that of course you see you speak, right, on the spur of the moment, right? So this spontaneous speech, in fact, right, you see when you listen to a question and you reply spontaneously, and how you reply, this is important, right? And you expect the reply, and then you think, and then of course you have to reply. So spontaneous reply is required, and which is not easy, right? So that's why if you want to be a good speaker, of course you have to have information, and that information would help you in this spontaneity, because you think of, you have heard about that, you have taken part in any discussion, any forum. So that spontaneity would is a part of important characteristics of speaking. So that would serve the purpose. And also in the speaking, there is another characteristic, that there is time constraint, right? Because you have to speak for some time, and then you have to shift the ball to your listener, right? If you keep on speaking for long, so definitely there won't be any interaction. So you have to speak for some time, you have to take your turn, and that's why in speaking what do? You take your turns, right? Once you are speaking, your listener must listen. If you both, the speaker and the listener, they talk together, there would be noise, right? The speaker's message would not be conveyed to the listener, and the listener message would not be conveyed to the speaker. So both take turns, right? They take turns. If they speak for a while, and then they take pause, right? And those pauses and those turns, in fact, help communication, improve communication flow. Otherwise things would not be possible. Fine. So therefore, of course, and we have spontaneity, you have what characteristics of what spoken, speaking skills, you call that. Then we talk about the principles for designing speaking activities. We talk about pre-CA activities, and then of course post-CA, right? Pre mean that of course before, right? Communicative activities, that when you are teaching the beginners, right? So what you do, that you need to keep in mind that of course they are the beginners, they need some basics as well. So they need some structures of that language, right? So for the structures you give, in fact, is important, right? And then the activities can be quasi-com activities, because even you give them the basics, you are dealing with the beginners, but what you need to keep in mind that is communication should not be compromised, right? So activities should be communicative, right? Understanding the fact that you say you are helping the beginners, and the beginner needs the basics. They need the basic structures of that language, because those structures would help them, right, in speaking, Fine. And but again, when you make those structures for your students, what you do, that you see, you make some, you think of some activities. You can use the pictures, right? You can use newspaper, right? And you can use your whiteboard. Fine. And this way, of course, you can in fact design activities. And the group work and speaking activities is also important. That, of course, we'll be talking about next year as well, that how group work can help you. And then what are the common types of speaking activities? Is that clear? Which are important types of speaking activities that we do. In fact, you see, generally, in fact, when you give information, when you give information, you are an information giver, or you seek information, right? You are information seeker, or sometimes you explain things. Being an expert, sometimes you explain things, right? Or, I mean, being a resource, the person, you give all these things, right? So these are, of course, some types of speaking skills activities are there. It can be a telephonic conversation. It can be what we call it, you see, mock interviews could be there. Mock presentations could be there. It can be debates could be there. Public speaking could be there. So all these, what we call them, common types of what speaking activities are there. And again, I would say that when you design the activities, you being a teacher of this skill, right? What you need to do, that you need to see the situation, you need to see the content that you have to include in this lecture, and act accordingly. So I was talking about, my dear students, we're talking about speaking activities, that which kind of speaking activities could be there, and how can we design these activities. And while designing these activities, we being good TEFL student, we being good TEFL instructors, we need to know the learner's capability, in fact, and we need to know that what is the principle behind this activity, why this activity is being designed, right? Which areas of language you want. In fact, of course, you want to make the part of that activity, and you want the learners to improve. In fact, when you make activities for vocabulary, when you make activities for speaking, so which areas and how you improve vocabulary of your students, and how you improve what we call it, the speaking of your students. So therefore, this speaking teaching speaking skills is very important area, right? Because I told you earlier that, you see, if you are a good spoken English teacher, your scope would be more in the market. Yes, it doesn't mean that, well, other skills are not important. They are equally important. But if you are a good speaker, right, other skills can be, in fact, can be improved, right? If you are a fluent speaker, right, so your, in fact, fluency at times it hides your weaknesses and accuracy, and a fluent speaker, mind you, in fact, overcomes his of course accuracy, the accuracy problems. Fine. Why? Because he is a fluent, and the fluent speaker, of course, helps his learners more, in fact. And well, of course, the fluent speaker, of course, can adjust himself in different situations. So now it's time. If you have any question, you can ask any question. Why speaking is important? Okay, good question, my dear student, that what is the importance of the speaking skills. In fact, very simple answer. I might have, of course, I must have talked about these things in this lecture, that we speak because we have to survive, right? A child cries, and that crying is speaking, right? and a child cries and then mother in fact feeds. So when you reply to your employer, employer would hire you in fact. When you ask for the product that you want from a shop, the shopkeeper would give you in fact. So of course that means to live in the society, to make a society, speaking is a must, right? And how you improve your speaking skills, of course the skill, so skill needs practice. Do you have another question on that? Okay, the natural process. My dear students, of course, I mean, how a learner acquires a language, you know it, that we start, acquiring by listening. First we listen, and then of course we speak. And I told you that speaking and listening, they are reciprocal in fact, right? So we speak to give information, right? And also, we speak to live in a society, and so is the case for listening skills. Any other question? No more question. So it's a time to say goodbye. See you in the next lecture on the same topic, teaching speaking skills. I thank you all.